What's the hardest thing about writing? Well, it's getting started. Maybe you're having a hard time coming up with a story idea, or you're stuck on where to take your story next. If you want a way into a story or a way through, I have 9 story starters to help you. This free PDF is full of story seeds and prompts to get you going. To download your 9 story starters, go to nancypanuccio.com/start. That's Nancy with an I, Panuccio with 2 C's, nancypanuccio.com/start. What's the difference between a plot-driven story and a character-driven story? Now, if you Google this question, you're likely to get an answer that goes something like this. A character-driven story is focused on the characters and the internal change more so than the events and situations that take place. A plot-driven story is focused on the actual happenings and the external changes of the story. Now, I find that this confuses writers more than it clarifies, and it's the wrong question to ask. Because here's the thing, you can't create character without plot, without that which happens. You can't reveal character without plot. And you can't create plot without character. They go hand in hand. They're inseparable. The better question to ask is, how do you integrate plot with character? That's what we're going to talk about on today's episode. Writer Unleashed is for you, a writer who has a story you want to bring onto the page and into the hearts and minds of readers. I'm Nancy Panuccio, writer, editor, and writing coach. And each week, we'll explore techniques, mindsets, and inspiration for writing stories readers can't put down. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let's begin. Years ago, at a summer writing program at Columbia University, I was fortunate to have Ethan Kanan critique one of the first stories I ever wrote. Now, his main criticism was that my story was plot-driven. Now, here's the interesting part of all this. I was sure that I had written a character-driven story. I had researched the character. I felt her emotions, and it was pure emotion that drove me to write the story in the first place. In fact, in those days, I wrote without any attention to plot. I honestly had no interest in plot. I had let the character's emotions and thoughts fuel the actions she took. So I was convinced I had written a character-driven story and that Ethan Kanan was mistaken. But over the years, as I continued to study and as I continued to practice, I came to realize that he was absolutely right. My story was plot-driven, not because of my process or even my intention, but because of the way the story was received by my readers. It had everything to do with what was on the page. So here's the difference between plot and character. Plot is the action. It's what happens. Story is what it does to the who it's all happening to. Story is character. So we have plot, the action, and then we have the story arc, which is the character's reaction to what's happening. So plot and character are inextricably bound. They're inseparable. You don't want one or the other to dominate. So on the plot level, you have external challenges and obstacles. And on the story level, the character level, you have your main character's internal turmoil. On the plot level, we have dangers and complications. And as a result, your main character will experience emotional defeat and loss of faith in him or herself. His or her deepest fears will be put to the test. So here's how to integrate plot with character. Number one, keep the plot thread alive. You want to keep the plot thread alive all throughout the middle of your story. Keeping your plot thread alive is not about piling on action scenes. The purpose of plot is to force your main character to make not just physical changes, but internal changes. Changes in thought, changes in belief, changes in who he or she is. Fundamental changes. Your character comes into the story wanting something so desperately, it should feel like a matter of life or death. It might literally be a matter of life or death, but death could also mean the threat of a marriage ending. Death could be staying in a dead-end job or a dead-end relationship. So your character has this goal, but the story isn't about him or her getting the goal by the end. It's about who he or she becomes in the process of going after that goal. Number two, always build emotions. You want your reader to make an emotional, visceral connection to what's happening in your story, not just an intellectual connection. The purpose of the plot is to put your character into situations that challenge him or her, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. So don't just put up roadblocks for the sake of thwarting your main character, not just as another requirement of the story. Create roadblocks that make your character overcome fears and his own resistance to change so that he can grow into the person he needs to become in order to reach the goal. Story is about transformation. It's about character transformation. That is what we read for. The internal change, by the way, is the harder change to make. It comes at a much higher price, and your main character will have to fight for that change. He or she has to step into a different version of themselves in order to get what they want. He or she should be a better, stronger person by the end of your story. And to do that, your character has to overcome limiting beliefs, fears, self-doubt, etc. Even if his goal is physical in nature, it could be hiking Kilimanjaro, or if they want to catch a fish, he or she has to step into a different version of who they are. They may start out fearful or out of their depth, but what happens on the plot forces them to change, to become who they need to be, because the alternative leads to a worse fate. A great example, Walter White from Breaking Bad. He starts out as this nervous, fumbling science teacher who resists killing his foes, who, by the way, are more than willing to kill him. And episode by episode, he becomes this force to be reckoned with. He outsmarts all his enemies and even enjoys the challenge of finding ingenious ways to kill them. So what happens on the plot level forces him to change so that he can survive physically, financially, and he'd also like to stay out of prison. Number three, complicate your main character. Another reason my story was plot-driven rather than character-driven was that my main character had this one-note emotion. Everything she did on the plot level was driven by jealousy and ambition. She was too simple. Now, the best stories are about characters with contradiction and complexity. Even characters who do terrible things are driven by some kind of pain, and they have some surprising qualities that go against the status quo. For example, Walter White is powerless at home. He's powerless in his own classroom that he teaches in. His students ignore him, ridicule him. They laugh at him at his after-school job at a car wash. His wife controls him at home. She is the one who's wearing the pants. But his cancer diagnosis propels him to earn fast money to secure his family's future after he dies. And by the end, he's this feared multi-million-dollar drug lord known by the DEA as Heisenberg. So he's kind of powerless at home, but when he's cooking up meth, when he's really at his best selling drugs and being this high-powered drug lord, he's a different person altogether. So he's complicated in that way. He's not this one-note character. He has complexity. He's a total badass on the job as a drug lord, but at home he doesn't have that much power. So there's this really interesting dichotomy, this interesting juxtaposition that's happening simultaneously. Character and plot are inseparable. They're woven together. Plot gives us the action. Character gives us the reaction. Now, I have a 3-act framework worksheet that helps you integrate plot with character. Download yours free at nancypanuccio.com/act. nancypanuccio.com/act. And I'll link in the show notes. And definitely listen to episode 54, where I break down the 3-act structure. So to integrate plot with character, number 1, keep the plot thread alive. Again, this isn't about piling on action after action. The purpose of plot is to force your main character to make internal changes. It's not whether your character gets what he or she wants or not. It's who they become in the process. So with Walter White, for example, it's not that he amasses a fortune or not. It's not whether he escapes going to prison or not, or getting caught, or that he even stays alive. It's the person he has to step into to get that. Number 2, always be building emotion. No matter what's happening on the plot level, whether your character's hiking the Pacific Crest Trail or climbing Mount Kilimanjaro or trying to catch a fish or save a marriage, your main character will be facing his or her greatest fears. They'll be experiencing self-doubt and having mindsets that they have to overcome and worldviews and so forth. So it's all about change, and you always want to be building those emotions scene by scene. And number 3, you want to complicate your character. Don't fuel the action based on only one emotion. We are complicated as humans. We never feel one thing or the other, and we're different people in different situations. So if your character has lust for power or greed or something, find ways to go against the status quo so that they're not just this one-note character. You want to keep your readers hooked into your story, connected emotionally, not just intellectually. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Writer Unleashed. I hope this helps you integrate character with plot. As always, the conversation continues on our private Facebook group, Writer Unleashed Community. So come join us and say hello. I'll see you next week, same time, same place. Till then, keep writing, and I'll talk to you soon.